Hello, everybody. I'd like to introduce you to Michael Boulton, who's the Managing Director of the International Division for Whistl UK Limited. Thank you for joining us today, Michael.
You're welcome, Dave.
Good. The sector we're covering today is the international cross-border sector. So could you give us an overview of your business in the cross-border sector and its position in the supply chain cycle, please?
So Whistl International operates as a separate division in Whistl. We operate, I suppose is one way of looking at it, across all of our divisions in Whistl, so domestic, fulfillment, mail, and essentially we offer services to customers for parcels, letters, express, what I class as deferred service, which encapsulates pretty much a huge chunk of consumers, verticals and sectors. So it gives Whistl the ability to offer everything from a 30-gram letter to a 30-kilo parcel essentially anywhere in the world, tracked and untracked. So it's a great proposition. Business has grown tremendously over the last couple of years. We're probably close to about 50 million in revenue just as a Whistl International business. And where do we sit in the supply chain cycle? So we don't have our own networks overseas. And I suppose you could argue that we operate in that first and middle mile. So where we can add value to the consumers, offering them choice, offering them a competitive solution into country, and looking at the bespoke solutions that we can give certain verticals, So I think it's well placed within the industry. We know where our place is, Dave. We're not a DHL, we're not a big consolidator, but we are growing fast, probably about 23% year-on-year growth. So yeah, we're well placed.
Good. And so you partner with localist specialists in that country you're going to, yeah?
So we've got about, if I take it in its entirety, just on the international front, we've got about 20 partners, and they operate essentially worldwide. So we try and have a solution which is generally 3 options for every single lane. It gives us a business continuity, it gives us choice, and it gives us a competitive view into each destination. But we also have some bespoke solutions, Dave, into some of the big destinations, Ireland, US, Germany, France, where we have some, what I would class more bespoke niche products into those countries, found printed matter, tracked media, for example. So yeah, we use a lot of suppliers, we use the strength of our suppliers, and we've got some great relationships in the market and some great solutions.
Oh, fantastic. And how many countries do you deliver to?
I think on average, you could argue over a monthly period across all products and services, 170.
God, that's a lot of different countries. And also you've got all the issues with local taxes and duties, which we'll probably cover in a separate podcast, because that would be very interesting for people. Yeah. And whilst it was a while ago, Brexit must have had an impact on the sector.
Yeah, Brexit was a watershed moment, Dave. It was a huge impact on the sector, and it affected pretty much everybody: carriers, middle mile, final mile, consumers. I think what it did do, it put a level of complexity into the market, and I suppose an additional level of cost that was in the market that wasn't previously there. So I think what Brexit done is it put people off sending internationally into Europe. So I think from a Whistl point of view, 4 weeks after Brexit, we lost about 40% of our EU volume from an e-commerce point of view. I think Brexit has been managed poorly. I think it's been shrouded in mystery, Dave. It still isn't necessarily finalised. You've got the Windsor framework, which is still bubbling away in the background. So I think Brexit's been a big challenge, and I think it's been the single most largest challenge that we've faced from an international shipper's point of view, probably in the last 30, 40 years. It will find a new normal, Dave. I think, Brexit, you find a way. So I think it will find a new normal, but whether it's the same level it was pre-Brexit, I'm not sure. I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, it probably was a once in a lifetime thing for most people, both consumers and obviously the suppliers of those services, because it's been a big adjustment for everyone, I would say, and there's probably been some good sides of it and some bad sides. but we don't always see the positive side of it. And I'm sure it must be a very big challenge for the whole logistics industry, full stop.
Yeah, I think it was the level of, I've got to be honest, Dave, I think the level of complexity increased. So there was more paperwork, more data requirements, and the sheer cost. I try and simplify it with some customers. You're buying a T-shirt pre-Brexit, it's going to cost you a lot more to ship it post-Brexit. So, the retailers, the online retailers, they change by, they either didn't ship into a certain destination because the cost was too high, or they raised the basket values. So, they threw a little bit more into the mix. So I think, and the truth is probably in between. I think the market has steadied off. I think there's still some overhang of Brexit for sure, because I think the UK is frowned upon in Europe in many respects. But look, you find a way in business, right? So I think it will normalise. There'll be a new normal. There is almost a new normal today. It's been tough. I think it's tough for consumers, and it's been tough for the carriers as well.
Okay, thank you. And everyone's had to adjust, like you say. What brought you into the wonderful world of logistics?
Say again, sorry?
What brought you into the wonderful world of logistics?
Oh, Dave, there's a question. Well, I'm a lithographic printer by trade, time served, would you believe? So when I finished college, I had the choice of going to university or going in some money. And ironically, a lot of my friends, they were sort of half split. Some of them went into the army, some of them went into the police, some of them went into work in factories, you name it, everything in between. So I wanted a bit of money to go out with my friends. So wasn't quite sure. Went to an open day regards graphic design and advertising, and found myself, not serving, but found myself opting for a 4-year stint as a lithographic printer. So served my time, came out of my time. I think 6 months after coming out of my time, I realised it probably wasn't the industry I wanted to be in for the next 30, 40 years. So I went to the print manager and said, look, this isn't for me. I'm probably going to have my notice in. He said, well, look, don't go. We've got an opportunity for you. There's a clerk opening up in the warehouse. So I thought, well, I can't come out. I've got a young baby, just, a young guy, new house. Went into the warehouse. Within a week, I was asked to be transport supervisor, then a warehouse supervisor. And all of a sudden, I was sat there as a warehouse manager within sort of 8 or 9 months, thinking, I wonder if there's anything out there. And, at that point, I went to a company that's no longer operating, Initial City Link, and applied for a role as a ops manager. Got that role, and the rest is their history.
Thank you. Oh, it's interesting. Thank you very much. And most of us, I think, a number of these podcasts, most of us have sort of fallen into it. It's a great industry we all love, but a lot of us have fallen into it. So thank you for going through that. So if you could describe the current challenges in your marketplace at the moment.
I mean, the challenge is cost is a big challenge, Dave. I think depending on where you see the challenge, Dave, whether it's on an export and an import, the import market, specifically out of China, is very commoditized. So it's very cost driven. So very select few who can operate in that market. US is becoming more and more commoditized by the day into the UK. From an export point of view, cost is king currently with the retailers. I think you've got to strike that balance, Dave, between squaring the circle and cost and service. You've got to provide something that brings the customers back and keeps the customers happy, but it's got to be at a cost which is acceptable for the business. So I think servicing cost and finding that right mix is crucial. And obviously, you've got the external factors you can't control, Dave. So, you've got the Ukraine war. Who's seen that? So, that's had a huge impact on cost and service and stuff we do going into that region. And then there's obviously the China slowdown as well. So, whilst we know that 1/3 of everything we're sat in a room in at the moment comes from China, there's been big impacts. And I think everyone oversubscribed through COVID. And I think one of the things, a lot of people thought this was the new normal. The real high shipping volumes was the new normal. And then they realised that actually it's not the new normal. Bricks and mortar open and everyone wants to go back to the high street. So I think people are a little bit more hesitant, a little bit more risk averse, and I think that's reflected across the UK space at the minute. Decision making is slower than normal. Cost is all about what you do. Can you do it cheaper, faster? Can you do it more competitive from point A to point B? And I think that's the king at the moment. So I think what you've got to do, you've got to navigate your way through that and pivot. And the only way to do that by offering more choice to get a bigger share of wallet, so that you can become more secure, a broader picture, Dave. So yeah, I mean, consumer confidence is a big thing.
Okay, thank you. And on the other side, what are the biggest opportunities for yourself in the next 2 to 3 years?
Opportunities in terms of for Whistl or international in general?
Probably international cross-border, really, if that's the sector.
Well, it's always summer and winter somewhere, Dave. So there's always speedos going somewhere, and there's always ski equipment going somewhere. I think that the opportunity for international is contra-seasonal as well. So there's seasonal, but it's also a contra-seasonal view. I think from an international point of view right now, I think there's an opportunity to launch into new markets, new territories. And I think predominantly, Dave, that's driven by the UK market. It's really commoditized at the moment. You've got the pressures, the macroeconomical climate, which is impacting in the UK. And businesses are trying to look about, how do they branch out overseas? How do they increase their revenue going overseas into new markets where, there's big markets overseas. So I think the opportunity for international is to try and convince a lot of the retailers that, international, it is sexy in the new marketplace. There is an opportunity to grow revenues overseas. So you're not necessarily reliant on the UK marketplace. And I think having the ability to offer choice to customers, it's not naive enough to know you can't go into every retailer and offer them everything, but actually going in and having the ability to handle everything, but focusing on the areas you actually do well. And I think, offering customers choice is a big play in the market these days, giving them something, appropriately placing the correct product in the right box, I think is the way forward. So it's a big opportunity in international. Brexit aside, macroeconomical climate to one side, there's a huge opportunity out there. The world is vast.
And on the other side of that, what are the biggest, threats to the sector, cross-border sector, over the next 3 to 5 years?
Consumer confidence is the biggest one. Consumer confidence. I think the market lies in balance. So you've heard at the US, there's a bit of rumour of that going into a recession, and therefore overnight the markets and obviously the interest rates potentially with a forecast of going south quite dramatically. So I think consumer confidence is key. I think fuel is a big one, Dave. I think fuel is going to play a big part as we move forward, and I think specifically given the troubles in the Middle East, I think that will compound that issue even further. So I think fuel surcharges potentially coming down the track, peak costs are coming down the track. So I think it's all. I think this comes down to external influences, Dave, which is going to push the cost up, and therefore the consumer, instead of buying the 4 t-shirts, will buy 2 t-shirts, for example, because they're squeezed at the bottom end and it's squeezed at the top end. So I think the market's in balance, and I think there's external factors which will dictate which way that goes. Yeah,
and perhaps when people are more confident, that, like you say, they'll buy 3 or 4 t-shirts, and when they're not, they'll maybe buy the 2 they need. It's a very, very good point.
Yeah.
Okay. And what are people in your sector not talking about that perhaps they should be?
Okay, where to start on that one? What should they be talking about? It's a difficult one to answer that, Dave. Are you talking about the consumer or the carrier?
Well, probably the carrier, really, because sometimes there's things going on that people talk about in the sector that it's not in the public domain that maybe should be. In other podcasts, people have been talking about the challenges of conversions to different types of vehicles, as an example. So what are things that should be talked about out loud that perhaps are not being talked about out loud by the sector as a whole?
Well, it's quite a new point, actually, because if I take the mail sector specifically overseas, you've obviously got the USO conversation in the UK. So obviously that's bubbling away at the moment. Overseas, that's also a moot point. Certain countries overseas are treating mail differently. So, first class sort of doesn't exist in some countries, I think it's fair to say. I think some of the overseas post administrations are looking at how they can optimise their networks by not offering, next day solutions or 2 or 3 day solutions for mail delivery. So I think that's impacting consumer confidence. That's impacting the customer's ability to offer something which is robust and gets there, in a reasonably sensible time. So I think that is something that will continue to rear its head, not just in Europe but worldwide, David. And I think looking at new ways, and I suppose the green agenda is a big one as well. So, Ampost is a perfect example. They're investing heavily in electric vehicles. They are a leader in the space in Europe, and I think that's going to be a big conversation going forward. Even more so with RFQs that are out in the marketplace. There's not an RFQ that I've not seen in the last 6 months that hasn't had a green agenda on it. Now, despite the fact that the vehicle that they're using is a plane, and it's taking their goods into South America or, for example, the Southern Hemisphere. Well, how green can you be? So I think the green agenda is going to be a big point, and I think people need to be open and honest about how that's going to play out and how quickly they can be green.
Well, interestingly, and thanks for bringing it up. The next question is, how do you see the green transition impacting your sector, the international sector, with things going on aeroplanes that must be difficult, and how does the green transition, and everyone, I think as a consumer, everyone wanting, whether it's globally or domestically, everyone wants everything quickly and efficiently and don't want to wait 2 or 3 weeks for something that could come by ship or whatever. How does that manifest itself for you and your clients you're talking to?
It's an interesting point, Dave. So if you take distance destinations, either into the UK or out of the UK, there's definitely a choice on whether to send it by air or by sea. Now, clearly, sending it by sea is cleaner than sending it through the air. It all comes down to timing, and is it acceptable to the consumer and the customer and the experience. So I think there is a trade-off and a balance on that in the future. I think I can see a point in time where if you want to send stuff by air, you're going to pay through the nose for it in the future. I think that will be, it's clearly starting to move in that direction at the moment. People are scrambling for volume at the moment, so there is a bit of a view that it has suppressed the cost to an extent. But again, it goes on a knife edge in terms of what happens in the Middle East, where people start to send that traffic. So I think on that point, there is a choice between, it goes by the sea, which is a manifestation of the World Wide Web, if you will. And in Europe, it's interesting in Europe, really, because it all boils down to volume. If you've got significant volume going into Europe, then you're going to want to optimise your vehicles going into Europe both directions. If you haven't, then there potentially will be temptation to resist in sending that every day. So instead of that being 5 and 6 days a week, that could potentially become 3 days a week, for example, and extended delivery terms. So I think the market hasn't balanced that out at the moment, Dave. I think that's an open point. I think no one's got the answer to see how that's going to play out, because I think there's that many external influences could impact how that looks in the future. But I think everybody is well aware of what potentially is coming down the path and the mechanisms that they're going to have to deploy to address it. So it's very conscious, it's there, but I don't think we've got the answer to that just yet.
And do you think maybe some government intervention or direction would help us all, to change the parameters? Because unless something changes, things won't change, I think.
Governments, or the UK government, slightly different, given the fact that Windsor Framework's been an absolute nightmare. We stand here today and it goes live in less than a month, and we still don't know the full ins and outs of how that's going to play out long term. So I think the governments, or what I would say is governments, have taken their eye off the ball, I think, on certain aspects of this. I think it does need, new legislation. I think we do need to look at things slightly differently from a cross-border trade point of view. And it does need a bit of leadership, both local and overseas. And I think, I don't think anyone's got the answer, Dave. Genuinely, I don't, because there's so many conversations that are taking place in parallel with different postal administrations all around the world, that if you speak to every single postal administration, they'll all come up with a different view. There are certain aspects that they know what's going to happen. So, for example, the US scenario, are they going to bring down duty thresholds in the US? Biggest buzzword in the market at the moment. Nobody knows, and how that would impact businesses shipping to the US, businesses operating in the US, for example. So I think the answer, Dave, is it does need a fresh look, and I think somebody needs to lead on this. But I think you've got so many different people with so many different conversations running in parallel. I don't think there's not one single answer.
Okay, now, and I didn't think it'd be a simple one. It's almost by talking about it, it keeps that debate going. In what development in your sector has surprised you most in your career in the international? What surprised you throughout your career?
And technology has increased. It's come on a leaps and bounds. When I first in international, when an item went overseas, you hoped it landed and you hoped it got to its destination, but you couldn't see it. I think now technology allows you to. It's opened the door, Dave. It's almost opened the book to page 1, 2, and 3. You can see stuff coming in. I think technology has moved on in leaps and bounds, and I think technology is going to play an even bigger part going forward in terms of how do we automate some of the things we do today. I think, technology has been the biggest thing. Visibility, and I think the way businesses adapt and pivot. I think one of the things that I can see in today's market versus the old super tankers, Dave. Someone came up with a good idea. It wasn't quite moved as quickly as you wanted it to because the left hand didn't speak to the right hand. I think now businesses are pivoting so fast, and they have to because the market's changed. I mean, the market can change in 6 months, Dave, and you have to pivot away from the market. So I think the way businesses have pivoted, I think, has been quite remarkable. But I think the way technology has played its part has opened the doorway for the consumer and the retailer. And I think it's made the journey smoother and slicker. And I think it really has made a huge difference to the market.
No, thank you. And final question I'm asking everyone, and you've sort of hinted at this already, which is great. If you could speak to the Prime Minister, what would you ask them to do to help your business grow and flourish?
I'm going to be selfish, Dave. I'll tell him to reverse Brexit. Absolutely. Simple as that. Reverse Brexit, you would probably double your business into Europe overnight.
Okay. Well, obviously we shall see if it happens. So I just want to thank you so much, Michael, for your time, your views, and going over the things that really helps us all understand the different sectors of what you do. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome, Dave.